Okay, welcome back to the interview series. Today we are going to talk marketing with Caroline. Caroline, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome, let's jump into it. So I'd like to know a little bit more about your background prior to coming to business school, and then also what kind of drove you towards marketing.
Yeah, so prior to business school, I was living in the DC area after having done my undergrad at Georgetown, where I studied international relations. At that point, after graduation, I was actually considering law school. So I worked at a law firm in the DC area for a year, specializing in financial products and services litigation. My role there was mostly to pour through massive document productions and financial statements. So really was able to develop strong analytical skills. Enjoyed the environment, how fast-paced the work was, but wanted to do something I felt more passionate about and connected to. So I took the opportunity to join a legal team at the Nature Conservancy.
Cool.
So I started working with our international programs with the Latin America and Caribbean region. When I started, in a nonprofit, you wear a lot of different hats. So I was essentially in a foundational department management role. So I oversaw our contracts, our budget, and then handled trademark and logo registrations within the region. And then after about a year, was promoted to a more senior position where I provided specialized legal support for our marketing. And it's that experience that really piqued my interest in marketing, and in coming back to school for my MBA. Loved seeing how the Nature Conservancy's marketers sort of spread the organization's mission to new audiences. So when I came to Goizueta, I concentrated in marketing strategy and analytics, and then interned over the summer in marketing research at UPS. Luckily, they took me back, so I just started a few weeks ago back in the marketing function at UPS, where I'm now a marketing analyst working with the e-commerce strategy team.
Awesome, that's super cool, and really combining everything from your background into what you're doing post-MBA.
Yeah, still definitely a lot of transferable skills.
Yeah. Right, yeah, let's talk a little bit more about marketing. So like 1,000-foot level, what does the industry kind of look like as you would recruit for out of an MBA program?
Sure. So before I start, I guess I want to give a little bit more context. So calling marketing an industry, I think, can be a little misleading, because I think your experience in marketing will really differ depending on your position, whether you're a brand manager, a product manager, or in marketing research or analytics, your company, and then the industry your company is in. So for instance, my role in marketing in a transportation and logistics company probably looks very different than the experience of a brand manager in CPG. But I think there are definitely some skills that employers are looking for across all those different companies and industries, especially from recent MBAs. So I think in any position, you're going to need some level of analytical abilities, really strong presentation and communication skills. You're going to get a lot of experience working cross-functionally with different teams to move forward marketing initiatives. And then there's some amount of strategy and execution. And depending on your place within marketing, you may be focused more on the strategy side or more on the execution side. And then some companies will have a healthy balance of both. So depending what you're looking for, I think there's definitely marketing positions that exist within a lot of different firms, and you can find what best suits your interest and your background.
Yeah, can we talk a little bit more about those different roles and what they might look like, just at kind of a generic level?
Sure. So I guess first is marketing research, which is primarily using primary data through customer surveys or behavioral data to better understand a company's customers. Then there are roles that I think when you're applying will be called consumer insights or marketing analytics. Those roles are going to be more technical. We'll lean heavier on the data analytics side. And that's something that you likely do want to have more of a technical background for. Similar to some extent with product management, which tends to exist more in the tech space. Whereas brand management and then general marketing analyst, marketing strategy roles, I think your background is less important, as long as you can demonstrate that you have some tangible skills to bring to the role. So you would be typically coming out of an MBA, an associate brand manager, and you'd be assigned to a particular product group or service offering within your company. and would be helping that team execute all different pieces of the marketing function. So working on the product, working on the campaigns, working on pricing, and sort of pulling together all those disparate issues.
Cool. And just to kind of touch upon how the roles can change depending on the actual industry. That was one of the things I didn't realize prior to business school, and how much that can change within marketing.
Yeah, so CPG, so consumer packaged goods, when you're actually working with a product that you're selling directly to a consumer in more of a B2C setting, that's where you're going to see a lot of brand management. Within the Atlanta area, I guess Coke would be obviously the biggest name. Kimberly-Clark does some recruiting here. But you'll find that a lot of the CPG companies are headquartered in the Midwest and in other parts of the country. So they don't necessarily all come to campus to recruit. I think other companies that are outside of the CPG space or have more of a business-to-business approach, like UPS, tend to not have as many brand management positions available, but instead focus on at least what they call marketing analysts or marketing strategy, that has more of a role where you're basically like an internal consultant for your company. You'll be working on a particular issue, particular product, particular service, or customer segment.
Cool.
But then your role could be a bit more broad.
Yeah, that's really good to know. And let's kind of learn a little bit more about what you did this summer so we can put that into perspective.
Sure. So I was with the marketing research team at UPS. So my experience was somewhat unique in that it wasn't a brand management role, but in the day-to-day work, I think functioned just like a brand management internship. So over the summer, I had one single project to focus on for the 10-week internship, starting with gathering research, putting together a customer survey, then involved a quantitative analytics piece, analyzing those survey results, and then ultimately using that information to build a business case to then present to the marketing team. So with UPS, since we're in a B2B setting, my project was focused on understanding what partnership means to UPS's small business customers. And then the results from my project were meant to inform how we work with small businesses and find better ways and more effective ways to communicate with them.
Cool. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I would definitely be interested in doing something like that. And I know this next question is going to be a little bit broad, but especially because there's so many different ways you can actually do marketing, is in terms of some of the other experiences that classmates that were kind of recruiting for marketing as well, what did some of those look like? Yeah,
well, so even across UPS, people had all different types of internship projects. I think outside of the research function, it's more common that you be working on something like maybe a new product launch or a product line extension, or helping to analyze a new campaign or a recent campaign, or maybe even working on something like identifying a new service offering, or something more related to market sizing or even pricing, depending on your background, your interests, and of course what the company needs to be done over the summer. So I think your internship experience can definitely vary based upon your role, where you get put within the company. But I think marketing is a function where the impact framework and the skills you gain through that class, I think, are going to be present across any of these internships, just in the fact that you're basically pulling together data to inform a decision and then persuade your stakeholders, yes or no, depending on your findings.
In your experience, have most of these kind of projects been like solo? You work in them by yourself, or do you have a team? And if so, how big is that team that you work with?
Yeah, so for me, I was on a pretty small team. I want to say there were 6 or 7 of us. Okay. Regardless of the size of your team, I think the internship projects were very much intern-led. So you were the project manager. You got to determine which way the project was going to go. But I don't think in any case anybody could have done the project wholly independently. Yeah. It was, at least in my case, very much expected that you reached out not just to your team, but if it's appropriate, to people beyond your team across the organization. to get the different data sources and information and context you needed to put together your final presentation.
Awesome. So for those individuals watching this that are still interested in marketing and want to pursue that, however, whatever avenue they do, let's talk a little bit about recruiting. So at kind of a basic level, how did you think about recruiting and how did you go about doing that?
Sure. So because I didn't have any formal marketing background or training, I really did rely on the advice from the Career Center. So I spent a lot of time with the career coaches at Emory, and then split the rest of my time, I guess, between first working on my application documents, so my resume, getting a solid cover letter together, getting my resume walk and star stories really tight, then focus the rest of my energy on networking with second years and with recent alums, and then also doing research on the specific companies and industries I was interested in. Because I think, especially for marketing, interviewers are going to expect some level of familiarity with the company, with its products, since you're going to be in charge of communicating what they do to customers. So the more specific and the more knowledgeable you can get with your research, I think the more that can help set you apart.
Excellent. And the timeline for when these opportunities come up, and I know that conferences are a big deal, so if you can discuss the timelines of those compared to maybe the more on-campus pieces.
Sure. So you hit the nail on the head. Conferences, I think, are more important for marketing functions. The biggest one is National Black. I don't know what that'll look like this year with COVID. I imagine they're doing something virtual. But in my experience, that came really quickly at the beginning of the semester. I can't say I felt especially prepared for it, but if you're really set on brand management and beyond that, really set on CPG, I think that's a great opportunity to get exposures to those companies that don't necessarily come to campus. That said, if you blow it at National Black or don't feel ready to commit to recruiting for marketing, there's still plenty of other opportunities. So once that conference has passed, I guess the next big wave is really going to be on-campus recruiting. So those companies that do come to Emory and recruit through the Career Management Center, those applications are due starting November, December, January, with interviews in January and February. And then if you make it beyond that and still haven't found a position, there are some conferences. This year, I think they were all virtual in the spring, where Emory and a few other schools participate, where you can still get in front of additional employers.
And I'm going to ask you this question because I did not cover it at all. For National Black, what would you recommend somebody work on early to feel more prepared for that? Because I didn't go, so I have no idea. I
would focus on your elevator pitch. That's going to be something it is good practice. Even if you don't come out of there with an offer, you'll have talked about yourself more in the span of 2 days than you ever have. So getting that really tight so you're confident approaching recruiters is really important. If you really are looking to get a position out of National Black and not just sort of recruiting experience and practice, I would make sure to actually do your research on those companies. There were some instances, even just where waiting in line to talk to a recruiter, they would do a little mini interview and ask you about their most recent product launch, and you were expected to know what it was and have an opinion. So if you're going to approach a company that you have a sincere interest in, make sure you do your homework.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I think for those of you that don't have a marketing background that are listening, it's good to know that that's not the part that matters, but the passion and the research that you do when you get into the MBA program about this can really help you set yourself apart and make you successful.
Definitely. And just within our own class, we had people who ended up in marketing internships or full-time marketing jobs from nonprofit, from legal, from finance, consulting, engineering, sales, marketing, retail. So as long as you can communicate clearly to the recruiter how your skills from your past work experience would translate to a marketing function, I think there's a lot of opportunities regardless of your background.
Awesome. And let's talk a little bit about networking. I don't know how important that is for marketing. I assume it's somewhat important that you reach out to people at the company, you get to know them. But can you talk a little bit about that process and the importance of networking?
Yeah, I think networking is really important, looking for marketing positions, not just, to help make connections that can pull your application out of a huge and often very competitive pile, but also really to just gauge your interest in companies, to learn more about other people's experience. And then the more you talk to people and learn about their role, the more insightful and thoughtful your questions can get, and that can help you stick out in an applicant pool and prepare you for interviews down the line.
Let's discuss interviews a little bit at a high level so people are aware of what they might expect when they get there.
Sure. So just like with any interview, there's the more behavioral part of the interview, so your resume walk, your star stories. That is still very important, especially for marketing roles where you would ultimately be telling a story about their product, service, or company. They want to see that you can at least do it about yourself. So making sure you have all of that piece really tight is important. But then the second piece are marketing cases. So they're definitely different from your standard consulting case. It's not as formal, not as in-depth, typically not as quantitative. There's a series of standard marketing frameworks that you're basically going to apply one or two of them in every case. So it's things that you can find by just Googling 4 Ps, 5 Cs, pestle analysis. There's a whole list. And if you are interested in marketing, at least the last 2 years, the Career Center has brought in a coach early in the semester who goes through marketing case frameworks. If you miss that or can't attend, don't freak out, but do get the materials from someone who went. Just those decks are so valuable in preparing for marketing interviews. Also, if you have any classmates or second years who went to like a brand camp conference over the summer, get a copy of those materials. Often they'll have presentations that walk you step by step through what a good marketing interview answer looks like and what a bad one looks like, and we'll lay out all the different frameworks that they look for. So once you get familiar with those, it's really just a matter of practicing a couple times with classmates. I relied very heavily on second years who had landed brand management positions to do, practice case questions with them. But in these cases, very rarely are you going to be doing real math. Typically, it's just knowing how different levers relate to one another. And then you also won't be making very detailed recommendations like I imagine you do in consulting cases. In the cases I did, it was either, expand into this region or focus on this product instead of this one. They're not going to be like, put 25% of your budget into this. And so they tend to be pretty high level.
Awesome. And that is definitely something that all of you should focus on much later in the journey when you decide that marketing is something you're interested in. And before we kind of jump back in, you had mentioned super days, which I think is something maybe not familiar to everyone, in a term that I did not go over during the term portion of the web series. So if you could kind of talk a little bit about that and how that works within your industry.
Yeah, so if you make it to the final round of interviews with any company, typically you're going to go in for a super day. So either a half day or a full day. In the past, they were in person on a company's campus. I imagine this year they'll be remote. But at least in my experience, that involved multiple, either one-on-one or two-on-one interviews, as well as some group interview activities and exercises. I know those in particular can be really nerve-wracking because, they're hard to practice for, and it's hard to balance being yourself and, being polite with trying to get, your voice out there and your opinion in before the interview wraps up when you're competing for attention. But I think in those, it's really just being yourself, doing very specific research about the company, being familiar with the industry and the environment they operate in, familiar with their products or with their services, having some thoughtful questions prepared. And then once you get to the day, just be yourself, enjoy meeting the other candidates, enjoy meeting the recruiters. And I think if you're enthusiastic about the role, that shines through.
Awesome. And we're going to get to our closing question. Just before we leave, this is something I like to do, but kind of your closing thoughts. What's one or two things you'd love to enlighten on this incoming class? It could be recruiting, non-recruiting, life advice, whatever you want to do.
I would, and we even spoke about this briefly before the interview, really give some thought at the beginning of the semester to what you want to focus your attention on in terms of recruiting, in terms of academics, extracurriculars, you name it. I think you'd be surprised by how quickly the semester ramps up, how quickly your academic work ramps up. And while I wish there were, limitless time to explore different career opportunities, it really does get difficult to juggle, especially if you're trying to recruit for, 3+ functions. It just becomes impossible. So the sooner you can get the information you need to narrow down your search a bit and focus your energy, I think the more effective you can be with your time.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great chat. I've actually learned a ton about marketing that I didn't know prior. So thank you so much. And this concludes this episode.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.